Welcome to 1869, the Cornell University Press Podcast. I'm Jonathan Hall. This episode, we speak with Jun ZHANG, author of the new book, Driving Toward Modernity, Cars and the Lives of the Middle Class in Contemporary China. Jun ZHANG is Assistant Professor of Asian and International Studies at City University of Hong Kong. We spoke to Jun about what it's like to be the first person in your family to ever own a car, the massive increase of cars and car owners within China over the past 2 decades, and how the Chinese, particularly the middle class, have thrived as well as struggled with this unprecedented influx of new automobiles into the country. Hello, Jun. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jonathan. Thank you for inviting me to do the podcast for the book that just come out.
Yeah. Congratulations. Driving Toward Modernity, Cars and the Lives of the Middle Class in Contemporary China just came out. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. So tell us, what inspired you to write this book and get into this research?
So that is, it's a quite, let's say the whole project is actually quite, let's say an accident. It is by no means, it's not a by design project. So to start a little bit, to time everything, have to wrote back to 2003 when I was admitted to graduate school in the United States. So I grew up in China. I grew up in South China. So when I got the letter and when I was prepared to move to the US, I was repeatedly told that I should learn to drive because life without a car in the US would be really difficult. So I enrolled myself in driving school. So at that time, actually, not many people had cars at home at all. And driving to work for leisure was really rare in cities, even in cities like Shenzhen and Guangzhou, which was some of the most, let's say, economically developed cities in China. So when I went to the driving school, the kind of vehicle that they use for students were actually pickup trucks. But of course, now pickup trucks is a cool thing in China. So, and then now they are called pickup. Pickup basically is a Chinese direct translation of pickups. But at that time, pickups had the name, it's called the peasant's cars. So you sort of get a sense, what the car scenes at that period. So at that time, you already see the number of bicycles have already significantly reduced. And then the cities are gradually moving on to accommodating more and more vehicles. But still, that was in 2002, 2003, and it was still really rare that you will ask, people around me would say, do you have a car? Most people will be very unfamiliar with this concept. And so then in 2004, I had a vacation in Germany, and I traveled around for almost a month. So as a student, that was a quite eye-opening experience for me. And so I saw a lot of different kind of way of driving. The interactions between cars, passengers were very different from the way that, I was used to in China. So the way how people drive, how roads were constructed, how people talked about cars, everything just was so different. It was just fascinating to me. And so after that traveling, I went back to China, and then I suddenly realized a lot of these, let's say, newsstands that sells a lot of car magazines. That was again something new. When I grew up in China, in most part of China, you don't see car magazines. And the very rare ones that actually came from Hong Kong, typically because friends or family visits, so someone brought a magazine. So we could actually see, what is a Lamborghini, what is a Ferrari looks like. But that was, again, really something rare in life. But then in the early, let's say 2003, 2004, we started to see a lot of car magazines that came out from China, printed in China, written in China. So, and I gradually then started to look into, what happened. And then, so that was the time when car sales suddenly shot up in China. So that was the time what we typically, a lot of Chinese at that time is called 井喷. So basically saying that suddenly the sales go up a lot. But then at the same time, that was a significant transitional moment when most of the car buyers shifted from government and company to private individuals. So that's actually sort of the really the trigger point for me, that I basically rewrite my entire PhD proposal and then switch to, I want to learn about these first generations of non-professional drivers. Now, how do they know how to buy cars, and how do they know how to drive? And these are people, they are first generations drivers at home. So quite unlike, like for example, a lot of American friends and colleagues, my European friends and colleagues, they grew up with a family car. They don't really need to go to driving school to learn how to drive, because they already learn how to drive from their parents as they grew up. But these are very different. So a lot of my interlocutors have no prior driving experience before they enrolled in driving school. And their car was the first family car ever. So this is the kind of issues that really intrigues me. So what do they see in a car? And what does a car mean to them? How do they learn to drive? What do they consider to be prestige way of owning a car and having a car? What is the weight of the propriety, that comes with it? And also there's a lot of other things that build around it. So what happened to the mechanics? How about parking? How do they deal with parking in cities in China, which is notoriously for heavy traffic, highly densely populated? So how do they negotiate all these with all these people, and how do they find the space, and how do they find the flexibility, and how do they deal with that anxiety that comes with driving? So that is the issues that really intrigues me, and that prompts for that coming 10 years of research and writing on this topic.
It's amazing to see the evolution of your study of this. You started the research back in the early 2000s, and you have some statistics here that you got from the World Bank that in 2010 the US had 423 passenger cars per 1,000 people, and China only had 44 passenger cars per 1,000 people. Now China is the biggest auto market in the world. So we're literally looking at a period of 10, 15 years of just incredible growth. And it's amazing to hear about, as you were saying, first time car owners that no one else in their family had ever even dreamed of owning a car, and now they're driving them around. It's amazing to see.
Yes, well, probably that's also one of the biggest challenges in writing this book, is that because everything is just happening, and it happens so fast. So I was constantly worried that whether my observation, was already outdated, where the direction, the whole society, a lot of the peoples were moving towards. I think that kind of uncertainty is also something that I find interesting. And as I mentioned in the book, that it also captures a lot of the feelings of being a middle class as a car owners, how they felt about in this rapidly changing society. Everything was changing, everything was growing, consumption was going up really fast. They suddenly can own a lot of things that their parents can never dreamed of owning before, but yet at the same time not knowing where this whole thing goes towards. So I think this the two, actually, the cars and then the middle class, therefore they sort of not two sides of the same coin, but they sort of more or less can help eliminate each other. So they can become metaphors, sort of more or less for each other in many ways. So that's why I decided then to put these two together in the book.
I really like how you do it. Right off the bat, you have a story using the metaphor You have a story of a conversation you had with a friend, Ming Li, and you're in a car on the highway, expressway, and Ming Li says, "We can afford a car now. Cars used to be for bragging rights. You used to dream about owning a car, thinking, then I could go anywhere. Now everybody owns a car. Here we are in the middle of the road, stuck. Life is like this too." And I like how you then use that as a metaphor for the middle class. And there's a saying that you had heard, above us are the elderly, below us are the young. We are the true middle class trapped in the middle. And I like that, how there's all this dynamic change and people are moving forward, but at the same time, there's all this uncertainty. So they feel a little bit stuck at the same time. It's great. Could you explain a little bit more about what you found with this?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, to say middle class is actually a very weird concept for many of my interlocutors. So sometimes when I have a discussion with them, they actually they often ask me back, "What do you mean by middle class?" So this is actually one of uh, the quotes that you just read are something that actually comes out quite often. It's actually more than once, meaning it's just one of the many that actually use a term that they describe themselves in this way. Um, so for one thing is the term class itself is very historically, politically loaded in China. So for all these, so first of all, for all my interlocutors, so this is a very specific kind of middle class. So when I say that this my middle class interlocutors, most of these people are professionals, most of them are college educated. So it's, there are other books that are on Chinese middle class. There are different kinds. So there are the more business kind, and there are the more civil servant kind. So mine is more mixed, but in general, they are characteristics by their higher education, professional jobs. Some of them are business as well, operates their own business as well. So and these people all learned, they are familiar with all these class terms that they learn from school. And we all know that in the socialist period, the class struggle was a big thing for the states, for the governments, and a lot of people suffer from it. So for a lot of people, they actually really have a very, very, let's say, ambiguous at best, the kind of attitudes. It's ambiguous. Sometimes it's just, avoidance in total. Just like we don't like the term class. I'm not sure what that term means. So that's so they have other Chinese term to describe themselves. So they typically if they really want to use, they use 阶层, stratum. It's more like stratum. And in most of the cases, they actually just omit the stratum or the class completely, just say 中产, so basically the middle property. So that is one aspect of that term. So when they talk about middle class, there's often a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek attitude when they talk about it. And then at the other hand is, again, this is middle class is something that they don't know what exactly that means. So they do know. So the metaphor they use that I'm trapped in between. So that refers to many aspects, actually many other aspects in their life. So they still are very much not trapped, but they are still, let's say, they practice this more like multi-generational families. So they still have a strong sense of responsibility for, to take care of the elderly, but at the same time, again, these kind of newer generations of parenting, new kind of parenting. That means they also invest a lot in raising their children. So they feel that they are the generation that's in middle, sort of the pillar of the family, but at the same time also being squeezed out by all these family duties. So that's one aspect. On the other aspect is sort of a social and political. To be a middle class is actually not exact. It's quite different from what you will imagine in many other places. for one thing, and they know that they have they have achieved our social mobility. But there's also a glass ceiling. They know that it's very difficult to move further up. In their understandings, in order to move further up, you need strong, very strong political network, and they do not have. So it is in that sense, they actually do not consider themselves to be social elite in any way. And so they could not really move up, but they also were quite conscious of that there are a lot of people below them who have a lot of difficulties in life, including, for example, their parents. Many of their parents were forced into retirement or being dismissed, laid off from the state enterprises that is, due to all these structural transformations in China. And then, of course, the migrant workers. So these people are realizing, there this kind of social structure, there is this social hierarchy. They managed to move up a bit, but they couldn't quite see where they can move from here on. And so that's why this kind of a traffic jam becomes almost for them, it's a perfect metaphor for them to know that they can move, they can achieve something. They managed to get something that they really wanted when they were young. But from then on, there's so many things that was out of their own control. And so I think that is something that I really want to capture, that kind of achievement, but at the same time, anxiety that comes with like being a middle class.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting. With this decade plus of research culminating into this book, how do you hope your research will make a difference in your field?
Well, I hope that like several aspects of it. And for one thing, I think a lot of the research on cars or middle class is continued to be very, let's say, Western centric, or tend to be, these kind of literature tend to focus on more developed economies. So you will see a lot of them on cars written, like, for example, large amount of literature is on United States or in Europe. For middle class, very similar. So so that's what I try to bring in, some different kind of stories. It's particularly the rise of this kind of automobility middle class in what we consider to be the global south. So how their experience look like, how those processes look like. So that is one thing that I hoped that my book can contribute to. And then the second part of it is there are a lot of growing literatures on mobilities and infrastructures. So I would like to bring in again another set of questions and empirical analysis, and to see how this kind of a mobility, ideas of mobility, material aspect of mobility has been shaped historically, politically, and culturally. And then on the third aspect is something that about social transformation. I want to provide a nuanced picture, a nuanced understanding about continuity and ruptures. And I think China provides a great example to think that, well, we like to think that, for example, China is a neoliberal country? Is it China a capitalist or not? Well, my answer to it is like, well, things are not that simple. And if you look at this kind of interactions, this kind of a mobility, social and physical mobility, and you realize that the past continues to play a very important role in shaping who can actually move up. Where do they start? What kind of edge do they get? And if we don't look at the past, it's quite difficult for us to understand why certain symbols become so important, why certain narrative could become such a discursive strategy that for the middle class to achieve something that they want, but at the same time without alienate themselves from the state or the government. So I think my book can contribute to the understanding this kind of a more nuanced pictures about social transformation.
I like that. I like the nuance that you're bringing into the conversation, as well as the bringing in the perspectives of the global South. These are all essential for us to understanding what's really going on. And in that vein, what ways do you see your argument being perhaps controversial or ones that will shake up preconceived ideas?
Well, I think one is that I have just mentioned. A lot of literatures and also in common understanding is whatever China achieved today is because of the market reform.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, the rise of the middle class is because market opens up and therefore there's a professionals. And then the car, similar story, China joins WTO, global capital got in, and therefore the car market is burgeoning and so on. And so my answer to it is that, well, it is actually not quite. If you look at, look at the larger picture, put it in a longer historical trajectory, we notice that, well, yes, the market reform did provide some kind of a structural transformation that makes certain things possible. But in order to turn that possibility into reality, we see there's a lot more other things that are going on. For example, we see a lot of this, for example, the middle class, the fact that they could actually rise up today from, where they start. Most of my interlocutors grew up with relatively poor family backgrounds. It's not like that kind of poor, we have to put it in relative terms because society at that time was generally poor. So everyone's poor. So but relatively egalitarian. So it allows them, it's that kind of a relatively equal footing that allows them to actually, by working hard and by taking advantage what the structural transformation, the market transformation, that, that kind of opportunity that they can actually move up. And some of them actually were very quite reflexive and quite critical, and they will look at generations after them when they or sometimes when they look at their own children, they will say, well, today sometimes you just know that for certain young people it will be very difficult to move up the same way as they do because the starting points are just so hugely vastly different. So for the people who are trapped now in the poor, really like in a highly stratified society, when you are poor, it's very difficult to achieve the same kind of mobility that they could have, like say 20 or 30 years ago. So I think that is one important message that I would like to bring up, to look at it, from a little bit of processes, and to recognize that there are different kind of institutional settings in the past that will continue to shape the way how people lived and their understandings and their practices and their, let's say, their morals, their morality, their ethical practices. And then the second findings I think it's important to remember is that a lot of critics will say, well, China doesn't quite have a civil society because the middle class were not exactly solid, a group with solidarity, and they didn't quite speak up like, what they are, like the middle class in Europe or in United States, how they constitute the backbone of civil society, to counter the invasion of the state power and so on and so forth. So my argument is to look at it is that, well, once we move beyond, this kind of a civil society, state and society dichotomy, you really look at middle class as an important force to shape political legitimacy. Then you will see actually the Chinese middle class is very much doing exactly the same thing what middle class in Western countries are doing, helping and shaping political legitimacy. So I think that might be the 2 points that will, if that can bring us some conversations, I will be happy.
Definitely. Oh, definitely. Your research and work is definitely going to spark conversations, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it's being reviewed in journals and the conversations that it sparks. And it's fascinating to see you're right there at an incredible turning point in China in this transition towards an automobile society. And it's great to have you grab this time capsule of this period. And obviously, it's still expanding at a dramatic pace. There's going to be plenty of new things to study as well. So you found a great topic to choose.
Well, thank you. And well, we do hope that it will stop at some point, at certain point. And again, even though I wrote a book on cars, I myself actually don't drive.
Oh,
And I
okay.
use public transportation. I walk. I mean, there are serious issues that comes with environment,
Oh my
and
God.
also that kind of exclusion, social exclusion, marginal groups issues. I think I feel exciting about seeing it, the rise of automobility as a exciting moment to explore social transformation. But on the ground, on the practical aspect of things, I'm actually quite concerned about this. If this kind of unhindered growth of car ownership continues, where will we end up?
Yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences that we've seen here in the U.S. and in Europe, where car becomes everything, and then they put highways and roads all over the place, and then you have somewhat unlivable cities. Then you see a transition away from that, where people are saying, "Hey, let's get rid of cars in certain sections of the city." So you see that in New York City, that there's Broadway is a pedestrian walkway. So there's going to be expansions and then contractions and then readjustments, and hopefully towards the better. But yeah, right now it sounds like Wild West or Wild East.
Yes.
So,
Indeed.
yes. So great. Well, it was great talking with you. Fascinating topic. And congratulations once again on your new book, Driving Toward Modernity.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, you take care.
You too.
That was Jun ZHANG, author of the new book, Driving Toward Modernity, Cars and the Lives of the Middle Class in Contemporary China. As a loyal listener to the podcast, we'd like to offer you a special 30% on her new book. To receive your discount, please go to cornellpress.cornell.edu and use the promo code 09POD. If you live in the UK, use the discount code CSAnnounce and visit the website combinedacademic.co.uk. Thank you for listening to 1869, the Cornell University Press Podcast.